What if the profound empathy you feel for a dying person isn't actually about them at all?
Oh, that's a dark place to start.
I know, but just think about it. Like, that deep universal reverence we all feel when someone is hovering right between life and death. What if it has literally nothing to do with their personality?
Right, or their history, or, who they are as an individual.
Exactly. What if instead you're just experiencing this raw biological reverence for like pure electricity?
Just the mechanics of life itself.
Yeah. And what if the very second they wake up and their personality returns, that profound connection just completely vanishes?
Because their entire identity, right, their whole self,
Yeah.
is actually just a socially acceptable hallucination.
It is such a jarring thought experiment. I mean, we spend our entire lives cultivating this inner garden that we call me.
Oh, absolutely. We defend it fiercely, we brand it, we're desperate to express it to the world.
So to suggest that this me is merely a fictional boundary just drawn around impersonal energy is profoundly unsettling.
It really is. It pulls the rug out from under everything we think we know about ourselves.
Well, today we are taking a sledgehammer to that inner garden. Welcome to the deep dive.
Yes. Glad to be here for this one. It's going to be heavy.
We are looking at Gilles Deleuze's book, Pure Immanence, Essays on a Life, which features his incredibly radical readings of David Hume and Friedrich Nietzsche.
Along with a really crucial introduction by John Rachman.
Right. And look, our mission today isn't to walk you through some polite history of philosophy. We are bypassing the safe academic fluff entirely.
Good. Because this text demands that kind of ruthless approach. It's not a comforting self-help guide.
No, not at all. We are going to strictly utilize the framework provided by Deleuze to perform an unvarnished psychological autopsy on human identity.
And the origins of society, too. Plus the mass cultural mechanisms we're all currently living under.
It's important to approach this text for what it actually is, right? It's a diagnostic scalpel.
Yeah, Deleuze is using Hume to expose the terrifying fragility of the ego.
And then he uses Nietzsche to track this psychological contagion, like a sickness that has managed to conquer human history by weaponizing morality.
If we follow the logic of this text to its absolute logical extreme, it forces us into a very uncomfortable corner.
Right, because it makes us reconsider whether things like compassion, justice, and technological progress are actually triumphs.
Or if they're just, highly sophisticated symptoms of a terminal cultural disease.
So let's just start at ground zero, which is the individual. If we are going to understand how a society functions or fundamentally fails, we have to look at the atoms that make it up.
And in Western thought, we all carry around this massive psychological security blanket.
Knitted by René Descartes. Yeah.
Exactly. I think, therefore I am. It's the ultimate safety net for the ego.
It tells you that beneath the chaos of the world, there's this rational, unified I just sitting in the driver's seat of your brain.
Right. Descartes gave us the comfort of an inherent pre-existing self, this idea that there is a container,
And into this container, we pour our experiences, our memories, our sensations.
Yeah, classical empiricism, like John Locke's stuff, operated somewhat similarly. Locke believed all our knowledge comes from sensory experience, sure.
But he still relied on the idea of a continuous personal identity, right?
Yeah.
A subject that owns those experiences and binds them together.
Exactly, like a basket holding all the apples of your life.
Right, the apples might change, you might learn new things, experience trauma, fall in love, but the basket remains constant. It's you.
But then David Hume comes along, and Deleuze highlights how Hume basically takes an axe to the basket.
Just chops it to pieces.
Total destruction. Hume looks inside and realizes there is no basket. There are only the apples, and they're just floating in the void.
And what Deleuze focuses on is Hume's revelation that the mind, in its natural baseline state, is not a structured container at all.
No, it's a chaotic, roaring storm. Hume uses the word delirium.
Delirium. That's a very specific, almost medicalized word.
Yeah, it's intentional. Left to itself, the mind is a delirium that just runs throughout the universe. It combines things completely at random.
Like taking the concept of a horse and the concept of a bird, and boom, it creates a winged horse.
Right. Or it takes fire and a lizard and creates a dragon. It associates, it hallucinates, it jumps from one fragmentary sensation to another.
And it does this without any inherent logic or unifying owner. It is just a harlequin world of pure, unfiltered exteriority.
Exactly.
Okay, but if that's true, if the baseline of my consciousness is just this raging associative hallucination, how do I end up feeling so consistently like me?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Because I woke up this morning and I didn't feel like a storm of fragments. I felt like the exact same person who went to sleep last night. How does Hume account for that continuity?
Through what Hume argues is the only true mechanism of the mind: habit.
Habit, just like repetition.
Yes. The self isn't a real ontological entity. It is a complete fiction. Deleuze points out that Hume calls it an incorrigible illusion.
Wow, an incorrigible illusion.
It is constructed entirely by the repetition of habit to discipline our mental delirium.
Okay, can you give me an analogy for how that actually works?
Think about water flowing down a mountain. At first, it's chaotic, splashing everywhere, totally unpredictable.
Right, that's the delirium.
Exactly. But over time, through sheer repetition, the water carves a riverbed. Now, the riverbed isn't the water itself. It's just a constraint created by habit.
Oh, I see. So yourself is just the riverbed.
That's it.
So my personality, my ego, everything I fiercely defend as my identity is essentially just a psychological callus.
A habituated fiction designed to hold back the void, yes.
Let me see if I can translate this to a more modern context. It feels like we are all playing a massive multiplayer video game.
Okay, I like where this is going.
And we are entirely obsessed with our avatars.
Hmm.
We customize the armor, we care about the polygon count, we give the avatar a backstory.
And we fiercely defend it against other avatars in the game.
Right. But Deleuze and Hume are pointing out that we are completely ignoring the only thing that is actually real in that scenario.
Which is the raw, impersonal electricity coming out of the wall socket that powers the console.
Exactly. The avatar is just the illusion. The electricity is the reality.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize what Deleuze calls a life.
Mm.
Notice the phrasing there. Not the life of an individual, but a life.
It's an indefinite article.
Yes, a life is that alternating current. It is pure, impersonal, pre-reflexive power.
It doesn't have a name. It doesn't have an ego or a backstory.
Precisely. The individual, the avatar you are so obsessed with, is just a set of empirical, arbitrary, and highly temporary boundaries. Boundaries drawn around that current by the force of habit.
And to really drive this home, Deleuze brings up this incredibly visceral anecdote from a Charles Dickens novel, Our Mutual Friend.
It's one of the most powerful moments in the entire text.
It really perfectly illustrates the mechanical difference between the fictional individual avatar and the raw current of a life.
So in the novel, there's this character who is universally recognized as a despicable, wicked rogue.
Just a crude, manipulative, thoroughly unpleasant individual.
Right. Everyone who knows him despises him, and rightfully so. His avatar is completely toxic.
But then this rogue ends up in a terrible accident. He is pulled from the river, half drowned, and he's hovering right on the razor's edge between life and death.
He's in a deep coma, and the text describes how the entire dynamic in the room completely inverts.
The very people who despised him mere moments before are suddenly treating him with profound empathy and tenderness.
They are unified in this deep, almost religious reverence for him. They are eagerly watching for his slightest breath, overflowing with care.
Even the wicked man himself, deep within his coma, seems to sense something soft and sweet penetrating him.
But the question Deleuze forces us to ask is, why? Why are they busting their backs to save him?
Because they certainly aren't revering the individual. As we established, the individual is a total jerk.
Exactly. They aren't interacting with the individual at all. In that liminal space between life and death, the habituated boundaries of the rogue's personality have dissolved.
The riverbed has flooded, basically. The individual has faded away.
What the people in the room are revering, what they are instinctively and biologically connecting with, is that raw alternating current.
They are empathizing with a life.
Deleuze uses a specific Latin term here, homo tantum.
Homo tantum, just a man.
Yes, a pure event freed from the accidents of his nasty personality. It is a moment of pure immanence, existing completely beyond good and evil.
They are witnessing the stark, beautiful struggle of life itself pushing back against the void. And in that moment, there is pure bliss, a profound, impersonal love.
But the punchline, the brutal, tragic punchline of this entire scenario is what happens when he finally stabilizes.
Right. The moment he recovers, the moment the avatar reboots and the electricity is forced back into the strict circuitry of his brain.
He wakes up, and he is instantly a crude, mean jerk again.
The illusion of the self reasserts its boundaries. The habit kicks back in.
The delirium is disciplined back into its specific nasty form, And that pure bliss, that profound connection to a life that everyone in the room felt, it vanishes completely,
They go right back to hating him.
instantly.
It's a terrifying proposition, honestly. It means that everything we fiercely defend as our identity is essentially a cage.
We are not rational agents acting out a grand destiny. We're temporary crystallizations of impersonal forces that have been tricked by repetition into saying I.
And this leads us to what Deleuze calls transcendental empiricism, right?
Yes, which sounds incredibly dense, but it simply means that we must look at the conditions of experience before there is a subject experiencing them.
A world where relations are entirely external to their terms.
Right. Deleuze says we must dethrone the verb is and replace it with the conjunction and d.
Okay, unpack that mechanically for me. How does replacing I's with and D shatter the self?
When you say the tree is green, you are enforcing a unity. You are claiming an inherent essence.
You're putting a neat little boundary around it.
But Hume's world is a harlequin world of fragments. The empiricist reality is tree and green and light and retina and neural firing.
Oh, wow. So the self is basically an illegitimate extrapolation.
It's an illegal leap of logic we make. We tie all those A and Ds together into a neat fictitious IS, just so we don't lose our minds in the delirium.
That makes so much sense. Deleuze notes that Hume applies this radical skepticism to the three great terminal ideas of metaphysics, too.
The self, the world, and God.
They are all incorrigible illusions. They are fictions we literally require to function, which means we don't bathe in error, we bathe in delirium.
Exactly. Our baseline is madness, and we habituate ourselves into sanity.
So if we accept this premise, if the individual self is just a habituated delusion holding back a storm of delirium, we have to ask the next logical and frankly terrifying question.
Let's hear it.
What happens when you take millions of these hallucinating fictional avatars, put them in a geographic area, and force them to interact? How do they form a society?
Well, you certainly do not get a rational, enlightened utopia, I can tell you that.
No, you get an arena of passions. And this brings us right to the dark underbelly of human organization.
If we follow Hume's logic strictly here, we have to completely destroy the traditional comforting idea of the social contract.
The social contract is perhaps the most enduring bedtime story we tell ourselves to feel civilized.
From the 16th to the 18th centuries, philosophers like Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau built their entire theories on it.
The general premise being that humans in a state of nature are naturally egotistical, perhaps violently so, but we possess rationality.
Right. So we supposedly look around, realize our egotism will lead to a war of all against all, and we rationally agree to limit our natural rights.
We hand over some power to a sovereign, and boom, we form a polite society. It's a very neat, flattering narrative.
It paints us as calculating, rational actors choosing peace. But Hume looks at the mechanics of human nature and realizes this is totally backward.
Society isn't driven by reason at all, and crucially, it isn't even driven by simple egotism.
No, it is driven by something much more dangerous and biologically ingrained. Partiality.
This is the core of the rot. We need to distinguish egotism from partiality because the mechanics are entirely distinct, right?
Yes. Egotism simply means I only care about myself.
Which seems bad, but mathematically it's manageable.
Exactly. If humans were purely egotistical, forming a society would be an easy mathematical problem. We would just draw hard boundaries, calculate our mutual self-interest, and avoid each other.
But partiality is different. Partiality means my sympathies are not solitary, they are tribal.
I care intensely about myself and my family and my immediate tribe and those who physically or culturally resemble me.
Hume calls it a limited sympathy. I do not care about universal humanity, I care about my in-group.
Which is evolutionarily sound for a small band of primates, absolutely. But sociologically, it's disastrous for a massive civilization.
Because egotisms can be mathematically curtailed. But partialities, tribal passions.
They don't want to just exist within boundaries. They want conquest. They want to favor their own at the direct expense of the other. They are inherently expansive and combative.
So the fundamental problem of society isn't how to rationally limit egotism through a neat contract. The actual problem is, how do you invent artifices to manage this?
How do you construct massive structural fictions that can artificially stretch our narrow tribal passions into something that resembles extended generosity?
How do you prevent partiality from turning into endless blood feuds?
Hume argues that society is literally an institutional invention. It is an artifice. It is not natural to us in the slightest.
It's basically a series of elaborate parlor tricks designed by the imagination to manage tribal bloodlust.
And nowhere is this mechanism more obvious and, frankly, more absurdly humorous than when we look at the concepts of property and law.
Let's really look at the text-specific breakdown of property because it proves how completely ungrounded our systems are.
Remember, in Hume's empiricist world, relations are external. There is no invisible, magical string tying you to your car or your house.
Property is an illusion that we have to collectively agree to hallucinate.
And the rules we invent for this hallucination are entirely arbitrary. Hume dives into the bizarre casuistry of civil law to prove this.
Give us an example because these are wild.
Okay, so he asks, does throwing a javelin at the door of an abandoned city make you the legitimate owner of the city? Or must your physical finger touch the door?
Which sounds like a ridiculous puzzle for a law school exam.
Right, but it's literally how empires claimed entire continents, planting a flag on a beach and claiming everything inward based on an imaginary association.
Or take the hunting example, which I found fascinating. If a man chases a hare to the point of exhaustion, but another man steps up from the bushes and grabs it, is it theft?
Hume says yes, the imagination rules it as theft. Why? Because immobility is not natural to the hare, so the sheer exhaustion relates the animal back to the first hunter's effort.
Okay, makes sense. But conversely, if a man reaches his hand out to pluck an apple from a tree, and another man reaches right past him and grabs it first, it's not considered theft.
Wait, why the difference? Both involve effort and interception.
Exactly. It's because the relations of association in our imagination function differently. With the apple, the relation is merely spatial contiguity, which is broken by the second man's hand.
But with the hare, the relation's causality, the exhaustion caused by the hunter.
The imagination uses completely different, highly arbitrary associative leaps to justify ownership.
It gets even more pedantic, which only further highlights the absurdity of it all. The text notes civil law debates like why does the ground win over the surface, but paint wins over the canvas?
Right. If I paint a masterpiece on your cheap canvas, it's my painting. But if I build a beautiful house on your land, it's your house.
Why does paper win over writing? These aren't just quirky legal paradoxes. They are absolute proof that property, justice, and law are pure fictions.
They are games of association. Our imagination, fueled by our tribal passions, bounces around trying to find a rule, literally any rule, to legitimize our selfish claims.
We need to create an external relation, like resemblance, contiguity, or causality, to justify to the tribe why this is mine and not yours.
Okay, I have to challenge this premise, because if we accept this, the implications are staggering.
Go for it.
Are we genuinely arguing that the entire architecture of global justice, the Supreme Court, the Geneva Conventions, the United Nations, is fundamentally just a sophisticated framework of make-believe?
Well,
Are you saying there is no inherent moral arc bending toward justice, but just an elaborate fictional game designed to enforce tribal boundaries without resorting to literal cannibalism?
viewed strictly through the lens of Deleuze's reading of Hume.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
As a Machiavellian realist analyzing this framework, government and justice do not possess a transcendent moral center. They're not based on representing some universal truth.
So what are they based on?
They're based entirely on a single mechanism, credibility.
Credibility. Not morality, but credibility.
Yes, because if left to themselves, these artificial extended sentiments we call laws are incredibly weak compared to the immediate burning fire of our tribal passions.
Right. I want what you have, and I want it now for my family.
Exactly. To stop me, society must invent agencies of social power, sanctions, techniques of reward and punishment.
So government exists to artificially add vividness and belief to the fictional rules.
It makes the illusion credible through the threat of force.
So justice is essentially an agreed-upon mafia truce.
That is a highly accurate analogy.
It's a cartel agreement. We have the 5 families, and they sit down and agree to respect the artificial territory lines.
Not because drawing a line on a map is morally right.
Right, but because the alternative is a war of attrition that burns down the entire city. The truce is enforced by the credible threat of state violence so that our inherent tribalism doesn't result in a literal bloodbath every Tuesday.
The truce itself is merely a mechanism. It is an artifice of human nature playing games with the imagination to ensure survival.
That is an incredibly bleak foundation.
It strips away all the romanticism, doesn't it?
It really does. We've established that human identity is a biological fiction held together by habit, and society is an arbitrary artifice built on managing tribalism through credible threats and legal hallucinations.
But the text doesn't stop there. It asks an even darker question.
What happens when the absolute worst, most reactive, most diseased psychological forces inside this societal artifice manage to infect the whole system?
This is where we transition from Hume's structural fictions to Nietzsche's psychological sickness.
If Hume showed us that the structures are arbitrary, Nietzsche is going to show us how a specific toxic psychological profile weaponized those fictions to castrate human potential.
Deleuze's reading of Nietzsche is critical here because we have to start by aggressively correcting the historical record.
Yeah, Nietzsche's concepts have been horribly, sometimes intentionally, butchered over the years.
Let's talk about the will to power. For over a century, people hear that phrase and immediately envision a fascist dictator.
They think it means a desire to dominate, to conquer, to crush the weak under a jackboot.
And Deleuze points out that this is the ultimate tragic misunderstanding. In fact, interpreting the will to power as a desire to dominate is exactly how a slave misunderstands power.
Wow!
Yeah.
It is the conception of power held by the impotent.
Right. It's the guy who has no control over his life saying, man, if I were in charge, I would make them all pay. I would dominate them.
The sick person dreams of being well just so they can flex on others. It represents a lack.
The true will to power, in the Nietzschean sense, is not about coveting what others have or subjugating them. It's about creating and giving.
It is the differential element of forces. It is the capacity to affirm life, to say yes to existence, and to act out of an overabundance of energy.
It is an elastic, pluralist principle of creating entirely new values.
So within this framework, we have active forces and reactive forces. Active forces are those that affirm, create, and act independently.
Yes. And reactive forces are defined entirely by their opposition to what they are not. They cannot create. They can only limit the other.
In a reactive force, negation comes first.
They do not start by saying, I am good. They start by pointing at the active force and saying, you are evil, therefore I must be good.
Which brings us to the most socially taboo, dangerous, and deeply unsettling idea in the entire text. It is a historical and psychological claim that modern society is terrified to look at.
The victory of the weak over the strong. The triumph of the slaves.
According to this text, it is the defining characteristic of our human history. The reactive forces, the psychologically weak, have won. They run the world.
Okay, I have to push back here. Mechanically, how is that possible?
Yeah, if they are fundamentally weak forces, how do they win? You'd think the strong would just, remain strong. Why wouldn't active forces just ignore the reactive ones?
Because they don't win a physical contest. They don't win by building a better army or becoming quantitatively stronger. They win qualitatively.
They win through contagion.
Yes. They win by separating the strong from what they can do. Nietzsche calls it a becoming sick of all life.
It's literally a psychological virus.
Precisely. Nietzsche outlines the stages of this triumph of nihilism, and it operates as a profound, step-by-step psychological autopsy of humanity. Let's trace the mechanism.
Stage 1, resentment, the spider. Or, as Nietzsche often calls it, the tarantula.
The tarantula represents the spirit of revenge. The core operative phrase of resentment is, it's your fault I'm weak.
To understand how this defeats the strong, imagine a lamb looking up at an eagle flying above.
The lamb is biologically weak, reactive. It cannot fly, it cannot hunt, it lacks power. So what does it do?
It invents a moral thread to drag the eagle down.
Right. The lamb says, look at that evil eagle, aggressively hunting and eating other animals. I do not hunt, I do not eat other animals, therefore I am morally superior.
The eagle is evil, and because I am the exact opposite of the eagle, I am good.
But the lamb isn't good because it made a noble choice for peace. It's good because it literally lacks the biological capacity for violence.
It is weaponizing its own impotence, dressing it up as a moral virtue.
Exactly. And the genius of the virus is that it infects the eagle. It separates the eagle from its power by defining the eagle's very nature, its active hunting force, as sinful.
Action itself becomes shameful. Life itself is put on trial and accused. That is the venom of the spider.
It preaches equality, but equality in this context strictly means demanding everyone be dragged down to its own level of impotence.
Which leads directly to stage 2, bad conscience.
This is the moment of introjection. It is a fascinating biological and psychological mechanism. The phrase shifts from "it's your fault" to "it's my fault."
How does that shift happen? How do we go from blaming the eagle to blaming ourselves?
Think about what happens when a natural instinct is blocked. If an animal has an instinct to act, to hunt, to express power, But the environment, or in this case, the moral fiction woven by the tarantula, prevents it from acting outward. That energy doesn't just disappear.
Right, it has to go somewhere, so it turns inward.
It attacks the self. The reactive forces capture life like a fish on a hook and force it to swallow its own struggle. They interiorize the fault.
They convince the strong that their natural instincts are evidence of inherent guilt.
So if I can convince you that you're inherently sinful, inherently guilty just for existing and having natural drives, I essentially own you. You will police yourself for me.
Yes. And by doing so, humanity forms massive, contagious, reactive communities. We unite not over shared joy, but over shared guilt and shared sickness.
Which culminates in stage 3, the ascetic ideal, the moment of sublimation. This is the ultimate alliance between God-nothingness and reactive man.
This is where the inversion of values becomes total. We take the sickest, weakest, most self-denying forms of life and we label them as holy.
Fasting, self-flagellation, poverty, denying your bodily instincts, hating the physical world, this becomes the highest possible virtue.
And vibrant, affirmative, joyful life is condemned as worldly, arrogant, and wicked. We promise salvation, but only to the most mutilated forms of life.
Everything is entirely inverted. Slaves are called masters. Baseness is called nobility.
And we look at a person who carries the massive, crushing weight of all these higher values, all these rules, all these guilt trips, and we call them strong for bearing the burden.
But Nietzsche says, no, one only carries out of weakness. A creator dances. A slave carries.
Okay, I have to pause and play the radical deconstructionist here because this is where the text demands we look in the mirror.
Let's do it.
If we strictly follow Nietzsche's framework, it proves that our entire societal sanity is completely inverted. It means that everything we currently call goodness, compassion, equality, and humility is actually a venomous contagion of resentment.
Yes, it is.
It is a system designed by the weak to castrate human potential. We are actively celebrating our own psychological sickness. We have built an entire global civilization around worshiping the lamb's resentment of the eagle.
I will cold-bloodedly agree with you that according to this philosophical framework, it is an absolute inversion. But I will also point out the Hobbesian inevitability of it.
Meaning what?
The weak are the masters now. They run the system. And they rule modern states like massive ant colonies.
Right.
The leaders of our institutions, whether in politics, academia, or corporate structures, do not win through nobility, strength, or creative affirmation. They win through sheer baseness.
They win through buffoonery, through manipulating the contagion of guilt, and through pandering to the lowest common denominator of the reactive mob.
It is a universal becoming slave. We are witnessing domesticated man.
Look at that deeply controversial quote from Nietzsche. We must always protect the strong from the weak.
Try saying that at a dinner party today or posting it online.
Right. It flies in the face of every single modern, democratic, egalitarian value we hold sacred. We are relentlessly taught the exact opposite. Protect the weak from the strong.
But Nietzsche is saying the weak are biologically and psychologically toxic.
It's like watching a pack of diseased, mingy hyenas surround a magnificent lion. Instead of fighting the lion physically, they just whine, complain, and guilt-trip the lion until they convince it that hunting is a moral crime.
So the lion sits there, paralyzed by a manufactured sense of bad conscience, and starves itself to death.
It is the perfect distillation of the triumph of nihilism. The strong are separated from their power by a moral fiction.
So we have this insidious weaponization of guilt. But here is the critical pivot. This didn't just happen in antiquity.
It didn't end with medieval monks whipping themselves in monasteries. It evolved.
And that brings us to the harsh, current world relevance of this text. What happens when this mass psychosis of the weak decides it no longer needs the concept of theology or God to enforce its resentment?
We enter the era famously declared as the death of God. And again, Deleuze clarifies a massive, culturally widespread misconception here.
The death of God was not some liberating triumph of reason and science over superstition. It was not humanity stepping into the bright light of rationality and shedding its chains.
No, it was a pathetic recuperation. It was a lateral move.
Exactly. Man killed God just to take his place and carry the exact same burdens of guilt and reactive policing.
Deleuze notes that it was an interreligious drama that simply became a problem between God and man. Man murdered God, but kept the empty throne.
He then sat on it, burdening himself with auto-responsibility. The exact same reactive life, the exact same slavery that triumphed under divine values, now merely triumphs under secular human values.
We replaced religion with utility, progress, and science, but the underlying psychological mechanism, resentment and guilt, remained entirely identical.
Nietzsche maps this out brilliantly through the figures of the higher men in his work. Thus spoke Zarathustra.
If we look closely, these archetypes map terrifyingly well onto our current global decay. Let's examine them. First, there's the ugliest of men.
The ugliest of men is the figure who actually killed God. But why did he do it? Not out of a desire for scientific enlightenment or liberation.
He killed God because he couldn't stand God's pity.
God saw him in all his wretchedness, all his reactive weakness, and the divine pity was intolerable to his ego. But the tragic irony is that by killing God, he subjected himself to something far worse, far more suffocating.
The pity of the rabble, the pity of the crowd.
That is the modern condition in a nutshell. We reject divine judgment only to subject ourselves to the terrifying panopticon judgment of public opinion.
We trade an all-seeing God for an all-seeing internet. Then there is the man with the leech.
This is a brilliant prophetic metaphor for modern hyperspecialization and digital technocracy. This man seeks exact, absolute knowledge of a tiny, highly specific thing. In the story, it's the brain of a leech.
He believes he has abandoned grand, vague religious values for hard, objective science.
But he doesn't realize that his knowledge is the leech itself. It acts as a relay for morality. His science is a new religion that pursues the exact same goals as the old one.
Cutting up life, mutilating it, categorizing it, judging it, and shrinking it into manageable data points.
If we view this objectively through Deleuze's lens, this perfectly describes the technocratic philosophy of Silicon Valley.
You have an entire culture obsessed with the algorithm, the metric, the engagement data point. They view humans as programmable inputs.
They are completely blind to the fact that they aren't liberating us. They are just priests of a new, sterile, mutilating religion of data.
And then there is the ultimate figure, the donkey.
The beast of burden. The donkey thinks that saying YAA, yes, means carrying heavy, miserable loads.
He fundamentally misunderstands affirmation. He thinks saying yes to life means taking on more burdens, more responsibilities, more guilt. He bows down to the new secular religions.
Let's apply this directly to today's institutional frameworks. We claim to be an enlightened, progressive, scientifically advanced society.
But viewed through the framework of the ascetic ideal, we are just the donkey. If you look at modern corporate compliance cultures, public apology tours, or the endless moral posturing on social media.
Deleuze's framework suggests these aren't signs of moral progress. They are the exact same mechanism as the priest's confessional.
The mechanism remains identical. It requires you to publicly confess your inherent guilt, acknowledge your bad conscience, and submit to the judgment of the reactive mob.
You must demonstrate that you are carrying the heavy load of societal guilt.
Look at outrage culture online. Let's really analyze it through the metaphor of the tarantula. Isn't a platform driven by outrage algorithms literally just a massive digital web spun by the spirit of revenge?
It is the tarantula, weaponized at the speed of light.
It preaches equality and accountability, but mechanically its only actual function is to drag everyone down to the lowest common denominator of outrage.
It is a machine perfectly designed to generate resentment.
It takes anyone who tries to rise above, anyone who attempts a creative affirmation or expresses active power, and immediately wraps them in the moral thread of the spider.
It injects them with venom, meticulously hunts for their flaws, and demands they apologize for their existence.
It is the absolute monetized triumph of the slaves.
And this brings us to a terrifying realization about our trajectory. We are living in a society composed of these higher men, and we are dutifully carrying the rotting corpse of reactive morality.
We have killed God, but we are still acting out the trauma of the ascetic ideal in our politics, our technology, and our culture. The question we must ask is, where does this logical extreme lead us? What is the terminal point?
It leads us to the absolute end of the human line. We are staring into the unforgiving future extrapolation of this text. AI, the last man, and the radical horizon.
In the final stages of nihilism, after the higher men fail to find true meaning in their secular religions of science and progress, we reach the ultimate figure, the last man.
The last man. The final terminal product of our culture.
The last man is the creature who looks at the universe, measures the vanity of trying to replace God or conquer the stars, and simply says, all is vain.
He prefers to fade away passively. Deleuze phrases it perfectly. Better a nothingness of the will than a will to nothingness.
The last man seeks comfort, warmth, predictability, and the absolute absence of struggle. He blinks and says, we have invented happiness.
And here is where we bring back John Rashman's introduction to the text, which provides a fascinating modern contrast.
Rashman contrasts the modern obsession with artificial intelligence against the biological brain as undifferentiated matter.
The brain represents the materiality of a life yet to be invented, full of potential and unseen connections. But AI represents something else entirely.
Let's ruthlessly extrapolate this framework onto our current AI trajectory. The modern obsession with artificial intelligence, with building digital simulations, with creating machines that think for us and generate art for us.
This is not a grand technological triumph of the active forces. Viewed through this lens, it is the ultimate final manifestation of the last man's will to nothingness.
Yes, it is abdication. We are eager for post-human irrelevance. We are actively, enthusiastically building our own replacements, not out of a desire to transcend, but out of sheer psychological exhaustion.
We want the machines to bear the burden of consciousness. We want the algorithm to curate our art, to write our emails, to mediate our relationships, to live for us.
We are willfully slipping into a passive, techno-feudalistic coma.
We are looking at the terrifying burden of the delirium Hume talked about,
Mhm.
the chaos of true, unfiltered existence. And we are begging a server farm to take it away from us so we can sit back and consume simulated comfort.
We are actively choosing a nothingness of the will.
It is the ultimate suicide of the species, but it's a remarkably comfortable one. We're going out not with a bang, but with a binge watch.
So the inevitable question is there a way out? If you read this text carefully, you have to abandon any optimistic, New Age idea of a collective spiritual awakening.
Humanity as a whole is not going to suddenly meditate its way out of the tarantula's web. The mass culture is terminal.
The only way out, according to Deleuze's reading of Nietzsche, is a radical, brutal, evolutionary bottleneck, the eternal return.
And we must clarify this concept extensively because the eternal return is perhaps the most misunderstood and butchered philosophical concept of all time.
It is not a hippy-dippy cycle of reincarnation. It is not the universe literally repeating itself so your soul can try, again, learn a lesson and get it right next time.
It is not a tired refrain of everything comes back. If the eternal return just meant everything repeats exactly as it is, it would be the most terrifying, nauseating thought imaginable.
It would mean the tarantula, the donkey, the last man, the resentment, the outrage culture, all of it comes back forever. That is exactly the thought that made Zarathustra physically sick to his stomach.
Right, so mechanically, what is the actual secret of the eternal return? How does it function as a bottleneck?
The eternal return is selective. It is the being of becoming. The best way to visualize it mechanically is to imagine it as a massive cosmic centrifuge.
The wheel spinning at an infinite, brutal centrifugal speed. It spins so fast, with such immense violence, that it actively repels and expels everything that is negative, reactive, and weak.
It throws off the sludge.
Exactly. Resentment, bad conscience, the will to nothingness, the pity of the rabble, they fundamentally lacked the ontological density to survive the spin.
Because they are based on negation, on limiting others, they have no core weight. They are expelled into the void by the very movement of the return.
Only pure, joyful active affirmation. Only the forces that have the internal power to say a true, uncompromised yes to existence can endure that centrifugal force.
They are the only things heavy enough to return. The eternal return is the repetition that selects, the repetition that saves.
It is a cosmic filter. It burns away the sickness. And what comes out the other side of that filter? What survives the spin? The overman.
Yes. And again, we must aggressively divorce this from history. The overman is not a fascist dictator. It is not a biological superior race.
The text explicitly mocks that interpretation as a slave's idea of what power looks like.
The overman is the post-human product of this centrifugal force. He is the child of Dionysus, representing pure, indestructible affirmation, and Ariadne, the soul that has abandoned the heavy, reactive hero and learned to love lightness.
The overman is a being capable of dancing over the abyss, entirely free of the spirit of heaviness, free of the donkey's burden, free of the spider's moral web, free of the need to be a last man.
The human essence as we know it today, this entire culture built on a combination of reactive forces, guilt, and nihilism, is a disease.
Nietzsche says man is a bridge, a rope tied over an abyss. We are not a destination. To reach the overman, the individual human, as a reactive, guilty, habit-driven creature, must be overcome.
It must be wrenched apart by the eternal return to produce something capable of a true Dionysian affirmation.
It's the realization that to save a life, that raw, beautiful alternating current we talked about at the very beginning, the fictional hallucinated avatar, must be destroyed.
Which brings us to the end of our unvarnished autopsy of the text.
We really winked there today.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We're going to drop a heavy, unflinching thought for you to carry with you.
A final, provocative litmus test for your own existence, based on this terrifying concept of the eternal return.
Imagine tonight a demon sneaks into your room and whispers in your ear. It tells you that you have to live this exact life, this very life you are living right now, down to the smallest detail, over and over and over again for all eternity.
Every single moment of cowardice, every hour lost to mindless digital distraction, every time you capitulated to the morality of the herd out of fear of public judgment.
Every time you let resentment poison your joy, every single petty reactive impulse where you blame someone else for your weakness, over and over and over.
Would you throw yourself on the ground, gnash your teeth, and be crushed by despair at that thought? Because if so, you are living as the last man. You are entirely infected by the sickness.
Or is there a single moment in your existence, just one moment of pure, impersonal, affirmative life within you?
A moment so joyful, so creative, so undeniably active that its sheer ontological density could justify the entire agonizing cycle.
Stop carrying the burdens of the donkey. Look hard at the fictions you used to survive, and look at the X-ray of your own soul, even if the image is terrifying. Thank you for joining us on this relentless deep dive into the source material. We'll see you in the abyss.